My 5-year-old daughter was struck across the face by my husband's mistress, hard enough to draw blood from her lip, and my husband stood 3 feet away adjusting his cufflinks like nothing had happened at all. That night, at a private gala attended by some of the wealthiest people in the country, that same little girl would run crying into the arms of a stranger and call him Grandpa. And by morning, everyone in that ballroom would understand exactly who I really was. My name is Elena Marsh, and for 6 years I let the people around me believe I was nobody worth noticing. I want to start there, because understanding who I pretended to be is the only way to understand what happened next. I was 31 years old, married to a man named Daniel Reyes, and living in his family's house in Westport, Connecticut, where his mother made sure I understood every single day that I did not belong. I had given up everything for that marriage, my name, my independence, even the truth about where I came from, because I believed love was worth the sacrifice. I was wrong about almost all of it, but I was never wrong about one thing, and that was my daughter Grace. Grace was 5 years old, quiet and gentle in the way that children raised around tension often are, always watching adults for signs of danger before she felt safe enough to laugh. Daniel had started seeing another woman about a year into our marriage, though I did not have proof until much later. Her name was Brooke Sinclair, and she carried herself like she already owned everything Daniel had: the house, the car, eventually even his last name. I endured 6 years of being called a freeloader by his mother, 6 years of small cruelties disguised as jokes, 6 years of swallowing my pride because I told myself it was protecting my family. Looking back now, I understand that submission never protects anyone. It only teaches cruel people that they can go further. The day everything broke open started like any other Tuesday. Grace had spilled a small amount of hot chocolate on the hem of Brooke's new dress while reaching for a napkin at our kitchen table. An accident so small it barely deserved a raised voice, let alone what came next. Brooke grabbed Grace by the arm and struck her across the face. Not once, but again and again, 10 times by the count I would later give the police, while my daughter screamed and begged her to stop. I ran into the kitchen just as the last blow landed, and I will never forget the sight of my little girl on the floor, blood on her lip, her small body shaking with a kind of fear no child should ever know. Daniel stood in the doorway the entire time. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply watched, and when I finally looked up at him, his only comment was that I had raised a daughter who did not know how to behave. I want you to understand what 6 years of silence does to a person, because it does not make you weak forever. It makes you patient in a way that eventually becomes dangerous to the people who hurt you. I knelt down and pulled Grace into my arms, and I felt something inside me go completely still. Not panicked, not broken, just clear, the way the sky looks right after a storm has finally passed through. I whispered to her that nobody would ever hurt her like that again. And for the first time in 6 years, I meant those words as a promise I actually had the power to keep. Because that very same morning, before any of this happened, I had received a phone call that changed everything I understood about my own life. The call had come from an attorney representing my biological father, a man I had not spoken to in over a decade after walking away from a life of extraordinary wealth to marry Daniel against my family's wishes. My father was Richard Callaway, the founder of one of the largest private investment firms in the country, a man whose name alone could move markets. And I had spent 6 years hiding that fact from everyone, including my own husband, because I wanted to be loved for myself and not for what I came from. The attorney told me my father had been quietly watching from a distance for years, waiting for me to reach out, and that he wanted to see his granddaughter before a gala he was hosting that very evening. I had not planned to go. Grace's bruised face changed my mind entirely. That evening, I dressed Grace carefully, covering the marks on her cheek as gently as I could, and I told Daniel we were still attending the event because I refused to let Brooke feel like she had won anything. Daniel laughed at me in the car, telling me I would only embarrass myself trying to mingle with people so far above our station. And Brooke, seated beside him in her own car following behind, sent me a text calling me pathetic for even showing up. I said nothing back. I had learned that silence, when it comes from strength instead of fear, unsettles cruel people far more than any argument ever could. The ballroom that night was filled with the kind of wealth most people only see in magazines. Chandeliers the size of small cars, servers carrying trays of champagne that cost more per bottle than Daniel made in a month. And at the center of it all stood security so tight that most guests never even saw the private wing where the true power of the evening was gathered. Grace, overwhelmed by the crowd and still frightened from earlier, broke away from my hand and ran, and before I could catch her, she collided directly into the legs of an enormous silver-haired man in a dark suit who commanded more respect in that room than anyone else present. That man looked down, saw the bruises on her small face, and something in his expression shattered completely. He knelt down without hesitation and pulled my daughter into his arms. And Grace, sensing safety in a stranger the way frightened children sometimes do, wrapped her arms around his neck and called him Grandpa through her tears, pointing back toward Daniel and Brooke and telling him exactly what had happened in our kitchen that morning. The entire ballroom went silent. That man was Richard Callaway, my father, and in that instant, every person in the room understood two things at once: that the most powerful man in finance had a granddaughter nobody knew existed, and that somebody in that room had hurt her. Daniel's face drained of every ounce of color as my father rose to his full height, still holding Grace, and turned his gaze toward us with an intensity that made grown men in that room take a physical step backward. Brooke, standing beside Daniel in a dress that had cost more than most people's monthly rent, opened her mouth to say something dismissive and then closed it again when she realized every camera and every set of eyes in the ballroom had turned toward her. I walked forward slowly, took my father's hand, and told him simply that I was back, and that single sentence carried 6 years of silence behind it. What happened over the following hour unraveled everything Daniel and Brooke believed about their own lives. My father's people had already been quietly investigating Brooke for weeks at my father's request, ever since he first learned through private channels that his daughter was married to a man involved with someone financially troubled, and what they found was staggering. Brooke was drowning in debt from loans taken out under false pretenses, had forged documents to secure a line of credit against Daniel's small consulting firm, and had been slowly bleeding money out of accounts neither Daniel nor I had known existed. Within minutes of my father learning what Brooke had done to Grace, he made a single phone call, and by the next morning, every credit line connected to Daniel's firm had been frozen pending a federal review. I did not slap Brooke that night out of rage, though the temptation was overwhelming as I watched her attempt to charm her way back into my father's good graces, even after everything that had happened. I walked up to her calmly in front of the entire room, looked her directly in the eyes, and told her that a woman who strikes a child 10 times and calls it discipline deserves to understand exactly what it feels like to be small and afraid. And then I struck her once across the face, hard enough that the sound echoed through the ballroom, hard enough that every phone in that room caught the moment on camera. Nobody moved to stop me. Nobody defended her. The silence that followed told her everything she needed to know about how quickly her power in that world had disappeared. Daniel begged that night the way people only beg when they finally understand what they have lost, dropping to his knees in front of my father and promising he would fix everything if I would just give him another chance. But I had already made my decision the moment I saw my daughter bleeding on our kitchen floor, while he stood there adjusting his cufflinks. I told him that a man who watches his own child get hurt and does nothing is not a man I could ever trust again, no matter how many apologies followed. Within a month, our divorce was finalized, and Daniel's consulting firm collapsed under the weight of the federal investigation into Brooke's fraudulent loans that had used his company as collateral, without his knowledge because he had been too distracted by the affair to notice what was happening. Right under his own roof, Brooke was eventually charged with financial fraud and served 18 months in a federal facility, and the last I heard, she had left Connecticut entirely, unable to find work anywhere near the social circles she once tried so desperately to enter. Daniel rebuilt a much smaller, much quieter life for himself, and to his credit, he did eventually seek real help and became, slowly, a more present father during his scheduled visits with Grace, though the trust between us as parents took years to rebuild into something functional. I did not do any of this for revenge, no matter how satisfying that slap felt in the moment. I did it because the moment somebody hurts your child in front of you and the person who is supposed to protect her does nothing, you stop asking permission to become the person your family actually needs. Grace is 11 years old now, and her laugh no longer carries that flinch it used to have when a hand moved too quickly nearby. She spends her summers with my father, who spoils her in ways I gently try to rein in and mostly fail, and she has grown into a confident, kind child who knows without question that she is loved and protected. I run a small division of my father's foundation now, focused entirely on supporting mothers and children escaping unsafe households, because I understand better than most people what it cost to stay silent for 6 years and what it feels like to finally stop. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who needs the reminder that it is never too late to protect the people you love. And make sure you subscribe to the Revenge Tales for more real stories about courage, justice, and the strength it takes to finally say enough. Thank you for staying with me until the end.